Welcome to the People Dividend podcast. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and today we're going to dive into the transformative power of mindset, healing, and personal growth. Now, I know a lot of my listening audience, we've thought about mindset, but I don't think we've connected these topics in a way that our guest, Jason Jurado, founder of One Path Coaching, will do, putting together mindset, healing, and personal growth. Jason is a master practitioner of NLP, timeline therapy, and hypnotherapy. And I'm going to let him explain what all of those mean. And I know that he'll do it in a way that demonstrates his skill as a storyteller, a transformative healer, and a dynamic speaker. Who I believe, and I'd like to know this from Jason Jurado in just a moment, about his mission to empower others to overcome limitations, create positive change, and thrive in their lives. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here with you today. I'm glad you invited me, and I'm interested to have this conversation.
Your work as a coach and healer is so inspiring. What led you to found One Path Coaching? Things rarely happen in a straight line, so you need to tell me. And what's been the most rewarding part of your journey so far?
Yeah, so the most rewarding part, I'll start with the last question first, is I'm able to live my purpose and live it with passion, and that's the next step. But I was born a healer. I was born feeling emotions like an empath, they'll say, and saw things, felt things that was a little bit different. And so didn't have a lot of mentoring. So I kind of had to just figure out myself as I went along. That's a story for a different day. But I knew something was different. I knew that my calling was to help people. And I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to accomplish that. And as a young person, I was always the person that, your friends would, if you're feeling down, go see Jason. And I kind of always knew, when to talk, when to listen, when to just be there, be present for them. And so that was kind of my calling for my whole life. Try to figure out what it was as I went through life. As I said, there was no mentoring. So I just kind of left it as that's just something who I am. And I didn't really explore it deeply. And through my life, I typical went to school, went to high school, graduated high school at 17 and went right in the Marine Corps and traveled the world, did what I did, saw what I saw, had, those experiences. And then I got out and you get a job, right? And so I tried a couple different things. And then I found retail leadership was it really allowed me to use my skill set. It was really a place where a lot of the folks that worked with me were in transition or they were starting first jobs and they were trying to figure their lives out. And so it paid the bills and it also allowed me to do who I was and who I am. And so I got involved with that. And just a kind of succinct short story, in 1999, I said, well, if I'm going to help people long term, I need to have a toolbox. And that's when I started looking at different modalities. And that's when I came across NLP, neuro linguistic programming. And NLP was brought together. It's an amalgamation. It's a modeled version of a bunch of different therapies. So Ericksonian hypnosis, Gregory Bateson for language, linguistics. One of the founders was a linguistic professor at UC Santa Cruz. And it just really called to me. It really spoke to, like, I love the art and the science of what I do of helping people. And it really spoke to me. And NLP, to break it down, is basically using the language of the mind to get the results that you want. And that's dealing with the pictures we have in our heads, our unconscious mind, which some people call subconscious mind, things of that nature. And so it really, really enticed me. So I started my training there. Over the next 10 years, I got certified uh, and did a basic certification. Then I did my practitioner. And then about 5 years later, I got my master practitioner. And that's when I really started seeing clients. That's when I fully stepped into, you know what, I'm going to do this. And so for the past 10 years, I've been seeing clients. And then for the last 4 years, I've been full time with this. And it's really been my calling to help people along their journey. And, it took me 40 plus years to move into my purpose. And so I really help people to understand what their purpose is, and then fully live that purpose.
I'd like to unpack the word healer and what that means. In some ways, it conjures up a sense of the mystical, sense of the exotic, a sense of transcendentalism. Can you talk about what it means to be a healer in your work?
So my company's name is One Path, and that doesn't mean there's only one path to where you want to go. It comes from a Ram Dass quote that he said, "We're all just walking each other home." And, the top of the mountain is always the top of the mountain, but there's many paths to get us to the top of the mountain. And we have to discover what our path is. And like you said, it's not a straight line, but where that takes us. The first thing I'll say about healing is that healing is not curing. It's not about doing something to somebody. It's not about giving them medicine or that. What healing is it's really allowing the person to come home. And I use the example of there's a quote about Michelangelo about carving David, the statue David. And they said, you took this huge piece of marble. And I just was looking at it recently, and they said that other people had tried, very famous people had tried to carve this huge piece of marble, and they didn't do it. And they said, how did you do that? How did you make this amazing sculpture out of that? And he said, I simply cut away everything that wasn't David. And that's what healing is. Healing is not adding, it's about subtracting. And like I said, I don't do anything to anyone. I help them get on their journey and help them along that path. And so healing is about, like I said, helping people to come home. And that home is what we start with. We were born into this earth a certain way. And then, we learn things in many different ways. And some of those help you and some of those don't help you along your journey. And what healing does is it cuts away all the stuff that's no longer helping you.
For long-term listeners, and for those of you who want to go back into the history, we've had another healer as a guest on the People Dividend. And I have a number of, on my desk, a number of artifacts from that healer. One, for everybody watching on YouTube, an intention bowl that was left with me. And also um, a tribute to the great sun god.
Mhm.
It's such an inspiring story, especially in the world of careers. And it certainly is an inspiration to think about healing, particularly in the way that you've described it. So I understand a little bit. Tell me about timeline therapy.
So, timeline therapy was designed by my mentor, Tad James, who passed away several years ago. And I learned NLP from him, hypnosis, and then timeline therapy. And what it does is it's based on the theory that there was a first time you were exposed to anger. There was a first time you were exposed to sadness. There was a first time you were exposed to fear. And what happens is the theory is that that's the gestalt. That's the first event. And then all the events after that are like pearls on a chain of, necklace, and they connect to each other. And so what happens is as the example I use is of like road rage. You're driving down the freeway and someone merges into your lane and they don't use a signal or something. And usually it's not something that's deadly or something that's could be, very challenging. It's just something that happens, and then that person gets angry and they kind of lose it. Well, it wasn't necessarily that event. It was something else. And so it ties back to an event that happened in their past. You can't do that to me. I'm important. I matter. You don't deserve to get in front of me. And so what happens with timeline therapy is we go back to that first event, the very first event, which when disconnected allows you to let go of any unwanted and unwarranted anger. And when you release that, what it does is it drops that entire chain of anger that's been through your life, that thread. So when you see a new event, you interact with that event as it is, not as an event similar to it was in your past. And the same way with limiting decisions, limiting beliefs. So if you have a limiting belief in your life, like, well, I don't deserve to make money. We're talking business here, so I don't deserve a promotion. I'm at the role that I'm supposed to be. That was a decision that was made somewhere in your past. And so what we do is we go back, there's trance involved, and we go back to that very first event, which when disconnected will allow you to let go of this limiting decision easily and effortlessly, as we say. And what happens is then you learn the learnings of that event. So you go back to it, conscious, unconscious. It's an unconscious event. You go back to it, you learn what you need to learn from it to allow that to let go. And learnings are this. Learnings are positive, they're for yourself, and they're for the future. That's what learnings are. So you don't say, well, people are bad or people, no, that's not a positive learning. You learn what you need to learn to let that event go. So then you can now see the opportunities in your life now. And so it's a hypnotic process. We do that and it works. It's interesting. It seems very simple, but it works, and it allows you to let that go, and it allows you to be present in the moment, because that's what it's all about, is living in the now.
Again, drawing comparisons to the other healer. She is a reader of the Akashic record. So to your therapist who helps trace that source moment, I think this Daria Funches works in the record of before time and current time, and quite interesting. And something that she might also be described as the Gestalt psychologist, and having done a lot of training. So bringing those concepts together, it's so amazing to see some similarities. And I think a lot of it goes to mindset and the importance of mindset. Once when I did some work with a shaman in a remote part of Mexico near Guatemala, the first thing he asked me to do is if I'd be willing to suspend my belief system.
Right.
So it's an invitation to just think a little bit differently.
Right.
And you talk about helping people, Jason, to overcome their limitations. I think to lead more abundant and powerful lives, to step into it. And mindset's so important. All that.
Right. The most important thing that we do, and what I do with clients, we start off as awareness. Be aware of the current situation. So be aware of what you currently believe and where does that come from? You were saying that, suspend your beliefs. Well, okay, but where do those beliefs come from? Because we tend to anchor those beliefs and say, well, that's who I am. And it's not, but it's what you believe. And you've just become it. Your unconscious mind made that rule when you were 3, 4, 5 years old, whatever it was. And it just wants to help you along. So it keeps that rule in place. We're talking about shamanic medicine. And you know what? Whether you're talking about Jungian psychology or, Carl Jung, or you're talking about shamanic work, it's all about life as a story. So what story are you telling yourself? And that's mindset. That's how you see it. So start off, well, what do you believe? Where are you at currently? What is the story you're telling yourself? Then we can start from there, removing limiting beliefs, removing negative emotions, discovering what your core values are, what's important to you. And once you look at, wait a minute, if this is most important to me, why am I acting this way? Because that's counterintuitive to achieving that value. And once you realize that, then you can make the change. So the mindsets of discovery, you know, being open, having a flexible mindset is very important. So that's the first step when changing mindset, is to be flexible. And let's start on discovery and see where you're at and then go from there.
And as you move through this process, how it unfolds for others, what I'm wondering about in your practice and in your work is, how does someone begin a heal? Well, I mean, I'm interested in two things: how someone begins a healing journey, certainly. In addition, in what ways are you thinking about healing at all kinds of levels of a system, whether it's a person forgiving themselves for something, or in a relationship saying, I'm sorry? How do you sort of, how does your work transcend? Because there's a lot of healing need in the work.
Right. And the reality though is that, when I work with clients and we start off with a detailed personal history and we really get to the bottom of what's really going on. What's the quote unquote problem? And I've been doing this for quite some time, and no matter how many times they do it, every time they might have 10 problems, they might have 12 problems, whatever it is, they all have a root cause. So when you talk about healing across the board, it's not about healing each individual section. It's about finding out what truly is the core of their issue. What is really happening? Where did they step away from self? Our home is inside. And when you lose track of where home is, that's when you need healing, because that's all healing does, is it brings you home. And so you have all this other stuff going on, and it shows up in a myriad of ways. The unconscious mind just wants to help you. And, one of my teachers, Dan Millman, he says life, and he actually quoted somebody else, I forget her name, but he says life will throw ping pong balls before it throws bowling balls. So your issues show up in little ways first. And then if you don't pay attention to it and make the changes, then they show up in bigger ways and bigger ways and bigger ways. And that's usually when someone comes to see me. And so what we do is we go, okay, well, what was the start of this? Where's the actual issue? Where's the disconnect from who you truly are? What is causing you to live a life that is not the life that you desire? And then working on that. People have to be ready to change. When you say, what's an ideal client? I say, well, the first thing I say is someone who's ready to change now.
that leads me to a question though about creating these positive changes, Jason, which is what advice do you have for someone who wants to make a change but doesn't know where to start?
It all starts in the beginning of awareness. Really ask yourself. So, two things: see where you're at, be honest with yourself. Where am I at in my life right now? What is going on? And then ask yourself the question, what do I want? Because most people, if you ask them what they don't want, they can fill page after page of, I don't want this in my life. I don't want this. And I don't want this. Okay. That's good to purge it out, to have a start. But then ask yourself, well, what do you want? And when you could answer that question, what do I want? Then you can begin your journey and take that first step towards achieving that.
Yeah, I'm reminded of two things. Is my dissertation advisor, my mentor, used to talk about the core of rot that we sort of have the privilege of working with over a lifetime. I think that's not in a negative way, but it's understanding how to use that and what to make of it. It's utility, purpose, and meaning and resolve. And as you worked with that in the folks with whom you work, and the how do they know when they've succeeded? I mean, what's the end point here? I mean, is it a spiritual thought? It may be. I mean, but what's the healing thought?
When we start working together, when I start with a client, when we go through this process of kind of self discovery, I'm going to be jargonistic for a second. The jargon is it's called the evidence procedure. And the evidence procedure is, how do you know you achieved your goal? And I literally will ask the client, how will you know when this problem is solved? How will you know when you're living the life you want? And because it's NLP, which deals on the modalities of sight, sound, smell, etc., what will you see? What will you hear? What are the feelings will you feel when you know you've achieved this? Because I can't prove to you that you've changed. You have to know that you've changed. And so I work with a client to distill that down. So they'll say, well, I'll be happy. And that's kind of ambiguous, happy. It is a goal. It is a highest goal in and of itself. But I'll say, okay, so when you're happy, what will that make you feel? What will that see? Will you hear a voice? Will it be someone congratulating you from the outside? Will it be a voice inside that you're saying, great job? And we really kind of dig into that so they know when they have that experience. And the reality is this: that's the big picture. That's how we start. But as we do the work and they start to feel different, man, I don't get angry anymore. Man, this happened and I wasn't upset. And they start seeing the differences through the work that they're seeing in their life, showing up the way that they want their life to show up, not being compelled. I do have to say this. The biggest thing that I do, we talk about mindset and everything boils down to this. When it comes to your life, are you at cause? Are you at the effect? Who's driving the bus? And when you realize you're driving the bus and you're in charge, that's how you know you've at least started on your journey to home. And that's usually how you know you're where you want to be.
Such an inspiring conversation with Jason Jurado. Jason, people want to know more about your work, and we'll have that all in the show notes. But how about right now? I mean, if people, maybe someone's sitting at their desk listening, where could they find you? How do they get in touch with you? How do they learn more?
Yeah, thank you. So the company name that I go by, it's changing from One Path Coaching to One Path Healing, but for ease of use, we'll call it One Path Coaching. And it's all words spelled out, ONE, One Path Coaching. And it's onepathcoaching.com is my email, or I'm sorry, is my website. But realistically, onepathcoaching@gmail.com. Just email me. I love to talk to folks. I love to have conversations. Reach out. I have my email with me all the time. So reach out and you can get a hold of me directly.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Jason, for sharing your wisdom, your stories with our audience today. And I want to thank everybody who listens to the People Dividend podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who could use a fresh perspective on healing and transformation. Until the next episode, stay well.